can do this even by yourself. I've done this with classes, but nobody does it. Finally, my assistant located one essay written in 1985 which speculated about this, but didn't go anywhere with it, and it isn't a well-known essay even. Appendix, The Principles of Newspeak. Would you open this, please? Now, I don't have a plank to tie you down to, but I will ask you questions. Remember, I have the ability to cause you to cry out in pain. That's a joke, okay? All right. The Principles of Newspeak. I will read to you. Newspeak is the name for that language, but here. Newspeak was the official language of Oceania and had been devised to meet the ideological needs of Ingsoc, or English socialism. In the year 1984, there was not as yet anyone who used Newspeak as his sole means of communication, either in speech or in writing. The leading articles in the Times were written in it, but this was a tour de force which could only be carried out by a specialist. It was expected that Newspeak would have finally superseded Old Speak, or Standard English as we should call it, by about the year 2050. Meanwhile, it gained ground steadily. Now, let me ask you, Ray. Is there anything funny about the way this is written? Is there anything that surprised you, but you might have pushed it down first, about the way this is written? Any phrase?
The use that there is no such thing as the opposite is just. I can't think of an example.
No, watch this. The phrase, or standard, it was expected. Notice the word was. Newspeak was the official language of Oceania. In the year 1984, there was. Articles were written in it. It was called, and Old Speak, and then notice the parenthesis, or Standard English as we should call it. Who is that we? Who is the we? By about the year 2050. In a normal novel, would the word was be used if this were an append? Who wrote this? That's what I'm asking you. Who wrote this? You assumed that George Orwell wrote it, because the book had said the end. Maybe they were trying to give you a clue, but I believe it always said the end. You assumed George Orwell wrote it. But would George Orwell talk about Newspeak as if it were something that had really existed? No. Who is the person? Who is the we that is writing? Try this. We don't know the name, but there's another person here writing, another character. It was expected that Newspeak would have finally superseded Oldspeak, replaced it, or Standard English as we should call it, by about the year 2050. This person talks about Newspeak. Correct me if I'm wrong. This person, let's call him the librarian if you wish, talks about Newspeak in the past tense, but also talks about it as something that you're not familiar with and which has to be explained to you. Would have finally superseded Oldspeak, or Standard English as we should call it. This person writes to someone, other people. It's like a baby introduction to Newspeak, as we should call it. Even the memory of Newspeak has more or less vanished. This has to be introduced to this person. That's why it's a character talking about the events of the novel as something in the past. Newspeak was the official language of Oceania. If you think of that, then the sentences make sense. In the year 1984, there was not as yet anyone who used. The leading articles in Times were written in it. All this has to be explained. This person, you don't remember Newspeak. It was expected that Newspeak would have finally superseded Oldspeak, or Standard English as we should call it. That's the big tick-off, the we. You and I, this is a person, a character, writing to fictional people by about the year 2050. And there's a hint. This seems to be written after 2050, that far in the future, for Newspeak to be forgotten so completely. And remember, this was written in 1948, and when I talked about it, and then China collapsed, and Russia collapsed in 1989, and came waving a white flag saying, it didn't work, we want to try capitalism. They tried their own version, but Jiang Qing was her and the Gang of Four. Now look. Continuing to read. The version in use in 1984, embodied in the 9th and 10th editions of the Newspeak Dictionary, which one of the characters referred to, Seem, or Same, I don't know how to pronounce his name, but he is working on the dictionary. Here it's written about, this character talks about it as if it was real. Embodied in the 9th and 10th editions of the Newspeak Dictionary, was a provisional one and contained many superfluous words and archaic formations which were due to be suppressed later. It is with the final, perfected version, as embodied in the 11th edition of the dictionary, that we are concerned here. The final version. The last version. Newspeak vanished. There's no more dictionaries. The purpose of Newspeak was not only to provide a medium of expression for the world view and mental habits proper to the devotees of Ingsoc, but to make all other modes of thought impossible. This is a primer. This is a basic, I have freshman 101 version. Even above, the first sentence said it was devised to meet the needs of Ingsoc or English socialism. They even have to explain what ingsoc means. This is long in the past. Its vocabulary was, everything was, and it goes on that way. Newspeak was designed not to extend, but to diminish the range of thought. Now look at this. Go to the third paragraph. Newspeak was founded. Read that.
Newspeak was founded on the English language as we now know it. Though many Newspeak sentences, even when not containing newly created words, would be barely intelligible to an English speaker of our own day.
Stop. This takes place in a different time from the novel, long after, where people have to have the word ingsoc explained to them. That meant English socialism. An English speaker and Newspeak would be barely intelligible to the people reading this, the people of our own day. Newspeak happened in the past. This is the happy ending. This supports what Winston hoped. It all happened. And in fact, it was prophetic. We saw the dictatorships collapse and vanish away. There are discussions, good ones, for instance, his sexual, there's a whole description of what it was like back then, written as if it's something from the long past. The party member, his sexual life was entirely regulated by two Newspeak words, sex crime, sexual immorality, and good sex, chastity. Well, if you can replace all sexual thoughts with the word sexism or smut, crime think. And the same, and in addition, only a person you'll spot these when you read it, thoroughly grounded in ingsoc could appreciate the full force of the word belly feel, which implied a blind, enthusiastic acceptance difficult to imagine today. It's all gone. O'Brien was wrong. The future wasn't a boot smashing. It's this philologist or librarian writing an appendix for people long in the future. It talks about Winston Smith as if he were a real person.
Imagine that an alternate timeline universe of humans of this event happening, and then well, I feel like this essay really puts into perspective how it brings more life and horror into everything.
Yes, he is able now to do things which would have been difficult to stick into the mouths of characters. It ends, "It was chiefly in order to allow time for the preliminary work of translation that the final adoption of Newspeak had been fixed for so late a date as 2050. That's the date that the novel actually ends with. Far in the past, far in the future. Now what you mustn't read, by the way, is the afterword, which was beyond Orwell's control, he was dead, some leftist professor who was unhappy with the pro-American, the pro-capitalist impulses, was hired to put something on the back to try to explain that Orwell didn't mean what he said or something, and the corporations were the real bad guys, and just forget it. It's not on you. You don't have it. This was just stuck on here. But do you see? Now, why did he do this? And why? I mean, it's such an interesting gambit. But he did it because if he had had the book end this way, with Winston himself or his Winston's son looking back or something like that, he would have lost the tremendous, terrifying ending. He loved Big Brother. People would have been able to read the thing and longing to just forget about it. Oh, well, that was it. Everything, it all washed away. This way, this brilliant way, he managed to hit you with that he loved Big Brother, and yet still do the future that he expected, that O'Brien was wrong, that it wouldn't survive, and that eventually it's the whole tremendous apparatus ends up as this semi-forgotten thing with some dusty little college professor writing up an introduction for freshmen to what, back in the history days, Ingsoc, in his boring tone, it's something dead, gone. There are hints by that 2050 being repeated that it's long in the future. 2050, we haven't even reached that yet. But that's the happy ending. That ending is consistent with the George Orwell that we know from his many books and his many essays. Not O'Brien. And yet, when I do it, students instantly understand it, and they even go through and point out other places. But in the appendix, other giveaways. And yet, there's only that one essay in 1985 that we've been able to find, not a famous essay or anything. It was an internet search that found it, and nobody comments on it, no one believed it. And I think I know why. In 1985, China and Russia hadn't just collapsed yet. We still thought everything was going to end with a nuclear war. Believe me, we thought. Entire books that had been published had to be rewritten. There was one called The Hunt for Red October, about a Russian submarine, and they had to put a foreword on it. I mean, it was a big bestseller with Sean Connery, I believe, and someone in the movie. This took place before the events, and one of our leading generals wrote a book, which I bought. He probably regrets writing. He wrote a book about 1986, something like The Coming War, explaining where the war would happen and how. People on the front lines in Germany had been given the permission to start firing without having to ask their superiors. He thought it would have to happen that way. Bang, bang, and then to continue. And then it was dumbfounding when the whole thing, it was like we woke from a bad dream. All of a sudden, China and Russia come, no, it didn't work. And then that essay, written in 1985, showed that Orwell had been prophetic even about that. But by that time, nobody paid any attention to it. I hope I can still look it up someday. So, 1984, happy ending. Good? I'm happy that I'm able to end our course with that.